The stars looked different when the ships came, but Captain Hunwoo had been watching space for so long that he noticed everything that changed in the black void above Earth, and today, something was very wrong, because where there should have been empty space between Mars and Jupiter, there were now hundreds of massive metal shapes moving toward his home planet with purpose and speed that made his stomach turn cold with fear. The ships were huge and strange, with metal that gleamed like mirrors, and weapons that stuck out from their hulls like the spines of angry sea creatures, and each one was easily 10 times bigger than anything Earth had ever built or even dreamed of building, and there were so many of them that they blocked out entire sections of stars as they moved closer and closer to the small blue world that had never seen visitors from space before. Hyun-woo pressed the emergency button on his console and spoke into his communication device with a voice that stayed calm, even though his hands were shaking because he knew that panic would not help anyone right now, and Earth needed every person to think clearly and act quickly if they were going to survive whatever was coming toward them from the darkness between worlds. The alien fleet moved like a pack of hunters that had found easy prey, and their ships spread out in perfect formation as they approached the outer edge of Earth's solar system, and the largest ship in the center of their group was so massive that it could have swallowed Earth's moon without even slowing down, and from this giant vessel came a signal that reached every radio and television and computer on the planet below. Admiral Kesethak of the Galactic Hegemony stood in his command center and looked at the small blue planet ahead of his fleet with the same expression that a farmer might use when looking at a field ready for harvest, because to him, this was just another routine conquest of another primitive world that would soon belong to his empire and provide resources and slaves for the greater glory of the hegemony. The message that went out from his ship was simple and direct, because the hegemony had done this thousands of times before with thousands of other worlds, and they had learned that clear communication prevented unnecessary resistance and made the process of conquest much faster and easier for everyone involved. Primitive inhabitants of the third planet. The message began, in a voice that sounded like grinding metal, "You are now under the protection and authority of the Galactic Hegemony, and you will surrender your planet immediately and without resistance, and you will provide tribute in the form of resources and population as determined by hegemony law, and any attempt to resist will result in the complete destruction of your world and all life upon it." The message repeated itself over and over in every language that the hegemony computers could identify from Earth's broadcast signals, and Admiral Kesethak smiled with satisfaction because he expected the response to be the same as always, which was complete terror, followed by desperate attempts to negotiate, followed by final surrender when the primitives realized they had no choice. But the response that came from Earth was not what he expected at all, because instead of panic and begging, there was only silence for exactly 30 minutes, and then a single transmission came from somewhere above the planet, and the voice that spoke was calm and cold and completely unafraid. "This is Earth Orbital Command," said Admiral So Young from her hidden station that the alien ships could not detect. "You have 30 minutes to leave our system, and we do not negotiate with empires, and any ship that remains after this time limit will be destroyed without further warning." Admiral Kesethak and his officers looked at each other with expressions of complete confusion, because in all their centuries of conquest, they had never heard anything like this response from a primitive world, and they began to laugh because surely these creatures did not understand the situation they were in. The alien admiral activated his ship's scanning systems to get a better look at this planet that dared to threaten the mighty hegemony fleet, and what he saw made him laugh even harder because Earth appeared to have no space defenses at all, and no military ships, and nothing but a few small satellites that looked like toys. Compared to his massive warships scanned for hidden bases, he ordered his weapons officer, who was a tall, thin creature with 4 arms and skin like blue stone. "These primitives must have some kind of defense system that we are not seeing, but the scans showed nothing except empty space around Earth and a few space stations that were obviously civilian and completely harmless, and Admiral Kesethak decided that the humans were either completely insane or too stupid to understand that they were about to die. "Target their largest cities," he commanded. "We will give them one demonstration of our power, and then they will surrender like all the others before them." The hegemony fleet moved into attack formation with their weapons charging. and their shields raised, and Admiral Kesethak was already planning the victory celebration that would follow this easy conquest when something impossible happened. The empty space around Earth suddenly filled with light as hundreds of objects that had been completely invisible became visible all at once. And these objects were not primitive satellites, but massive defense platforms with weapons that looked like nothing the hegemony had ever seen before. Admiral So Young sat in her command chair on Defense Platform Alpha and watched the alien ships with the same calm expression she had worn during the communication, and her fingers moved across control panels with practiced ease as she brought Earth's true defenses online for the first time in their history. "All platforms report ready," said Lieutenant Minho from his position at the tactical station. "Enemy fleet is in optimal firing position, and all weapon systems are charged and locked on target." "Fire," said So Young with no emotion in her voice. The space around Earth exploded with beams of energy that moved faster than light and struck the hegemony ships before their crews even knew they were under attack, and the alien shields that had protected them in 1,000. Battles simply disappeared like smoke when the Earth weapons hit them. Admiral Kesethak watched in horror as his flagship's shields failed completely, and alarms began screaming throughout his ship, and his weapons officer was shouting reports about massive damage to their hull and systems failures throughout the fleet. "How is this possible?" he screamed at his scanning officer. "Where did these weapons come from, and why did our instruments not detect them?" But there was no time for answers, because the Earth platforms were firing again, and this time their beams cut through the hegemony ships like hot knives through butter, and explosions began blooming throughout the alien fleet as ships that had conquered star systems were destroyed by a planet that was supposed to be helpless. Lieutenant Ji-eun launched her fighter from Platform Beta and accelerated toward the alien fleet with a speed that made their fastest ships look like they were standing still, and her weapons locked onto enemy targets with computer precision that gave the aliens no chance to dodge or escape. She flew between the massive alien ships like a bird flying between trees, and her energy cannons fired continuously as she moved, and every shot found its target and left another enemy vessel dead in space or exploding into pieces that scattered across the void. The hegemony fleet that had come to conquer Earth was being destroyed so quickly that Admiral Kesethak could barely understand what was happening, and his ships were dying faster than his crew could count the losses, and he realized with growing terror that his mighty fleet was completely helpless against these impossible weapons. "Retreat," he ordered, but half his ships were already dead, and the others were too damaged to jump to faster than light speed, and the Earth fighters were hunting down every vessel that tried to escape and destroying them with weapons that seemed to ignore every law of physics that the hegemony understood. When the battle was over, less than 50 ships remained from the fleet of over 800 that had come to conquer Earth, and these survivors limped away into deep space, carrying news of a defeat that no one in the galaxy would believe. Admiral So Young looked at the debris field that had been an invasion fleet and activated her communication system to send a message that would reach every corner of the galaxy. "This is Earth," she said. "We are a sovereign world, and we claim this entire system as our territory, and any ship that enters our space without permission will be destroyed, and any world that supports aggression against us will face consequences." The message spread across faster than light communication networks to every planet and station and ship in known space, and for the first time in galactic history, a single world had not only defeated a hegemony fleet, but had issued an ultimatum to the most powerful empire in the galaxy. But Earth was just getting started. The news of Earth's victory spread through the galaxy like fire through dry grass, and on every world that belonged to the galactic hegemony, people gathered around communication devices to hear the impossible story of how a single primitive planet had destroyed an entire conquest fleet and issued threats to the most powerful empire in known space. On the hegemony capital world of Nexus Prime, the ruling council met in emergency session, and the 12 species that controlled the galaxy argued, with voices full of anger and disbelief, because never in their 1,000-year history had any world dared to resist them, and certainly no primitive backwater planet should have been able to destroy their ships. The Zephyrian Hive Queens clicked, their mandibles in rage while the crystalline Nexari collective minds pulsed with colors that meant confusion, and the reptilian Vorth admirals hissed through their sharp teeth as they demanded immediate revenge against the upstart humans who had dared to challenge their authority. "This cannot be allowed to stand," declared High Commander Zexthul of the Vorth military caste. "If word spreads that a primitive world can defeat our fleets, then every species in the galaxy will think they can rebel against our rule." The Nexari collective spoke with a voice like breaking glass. "The humans must possess technology that our scans failed to detect, and we must learn how they achieved this impossible victory before we plan our response." But Admiral Kesthak, who had escaped the battle with his life and his dignity in ruins, stood before the council and told them what he had seen, and his words filled the chamber with a silence that felt like the cold of space. "Their weapons ignored our shields completely," he said, "and their ships moved faster than anything we have ever encountered, and they had defense platforms that appeared from nowhere, as if they had been hiding in folded space itself." The council members looked at each other with expressions that ranged from disbelief to growing fear, because if the humans truly possessed such advanced technology, then perhaps they were not as primitive as everyone had assumed. On Earth, Admiral So Young stood in the command center of Defense Platform Alpha and watched displays that showed hegemony military movements throughout the galaxy, and she knew that the aliens would not accept their defeat and would return with more ships and more weapons. "They are gathering forces," reported Lieutenant Minho from his intelligence station. "Our deep space monitors are detecting massive fleet movements from at least 6 different hegemony sectors." So Young nodded because she had expected this response, and Earth had been preparing for this moment for much longer than the aliens realized, and humanity's true strength was not in their defense platforms, but in their ability to adapt and plan and fight in ways that no other species had ever imagined. "Begin Phase 2, she ordered, and across the solar system hidden shipyards that had been building in secret for decades began to open and reveal vessels that looked nothing like the primitive rockets that Earth had used to reach its own moon. Captain Sungmin commanded the Earth ship Retribution. As it emerged from its hidden dock on the far side of Mars and activated engines that bent space around the vessel and allowed it to move faster than light without using the jump gates that the hegemony controlled, his mission was simple and direct, because Earth had decided that the best defense was a strong offense, and if the hegemony wanted to bring more fleets to attack humanity, then those fleets would never reach Earth, because they would be destroyed at their source. The Retribution jumped through space using coordinates that Earth's intelligence network had gathered over years of careful observation, and appeared in the Kepler system where the hegemony maintained one of their largest shipyards and began building vessels for their revenge attack against the upstart humans. Sungmin looked at the massive construction facility that floated in space around a red giant star and smiled because the aliens had built their shipyard without any real defenses, because they had never imagined that anyone would be able to attack them in their own territory. "Target the main power cores," he ordered his weapons officer, "and make sure we destroy their communication array first so they cannot send warning to other facilities." The Retribution's weapons were based on principles that human scientists had developed by studying captured hegemony technology and improving it with human creativity and innovation, and when the ship fired its main cannon, the energy beam passed through the shipyard's shields like they were made of paper. The massive facility exploded in a ball of fire that could be seen from 3 star systems away, and with it died 6 months of work and hundreds of ships that would never threaten Earth. But Sungmin was not finished, because Earth had given him a list of targets that would cripple the hegemony's ability to wage war, and his ship jumped to the next system on the list, and then the next, and each time another hegemony facility disappeared in flames. Lieutenant Ji-eun led a squadron of Earth fighters on a different kind of mission as they approached a hegemony communication relay that connected dozens of star systems and allowed the Empire to coordinate their military forces across vast distances. Her ships were so small that the hegemony sensors barely detected them, and by the time the alien defenders realized they were under attack, it was already too late, because Ji-eun's weapons had destroyed the main transmitter and left entire sectors of the galaxy unable to communicate with each other. "Target destroyed," she reported to Admiral So Young. The hegemony will not be able to coordinate their fleets in this region for at least several months, all. Across hegemony space, similar attacks were taking place as Earth's forces struck at infrastructure and supply lines and communication networks with precision that left the aliens reeling and confused because they had never faced an enemy that fought this way. The hegemony had always won their wars by bringing massive fleets to bear against their enemies and overwhelming them with superior numbers and firepower. But Earth refused to fight that kind of battle and instead struck at the foundation that made those fleets possible. On Nexus Prime, the ruling council watched reports of destruction pour in from across their empire, and they began to realize that they were not dealing with a primitive world that had gotten lucky, but with a species that had been studying them and planning for this war for much longer than anyone had suspected. "How are they moving their ships without using our jump gates?" demanded High Commander Zexthul. "And how do they know the locations of our most secret facilities?" Intelligence Officer Mordak, who belonged to a species of shapeshifters that specialized in gathering information, stood before the council with news that made their worst fears seem small by comparison. "We have discovered evidence that the humans have been infiltrating our communication networks for years," he reported. "They have been watching us and learning our weaknesses, and they know everything about our military capabilities and strategic plans." The silence that followed this announcement was broken only by the sound of Zephyrian mandibles clicking in what their species called the rhythm of despair. Admiral So Young received reports from all her strike teams and watched as red dots that represented hegemony facilities disappeared from her tactical display one by one, and she knew that the aliens were beginning to understand that Earth was not just defending itself, but was actively dismantling their empire. "Phase 2 is complete," reported Lieutenant Minho. "Hegemony fleet construction has been reduced by 60%, and their communication network is severely damaged. Begin Phase 3, ordered So Young and across human space. New ships began to launch on missions that would carry the war deep into the heart of hegemony territory. Captain Dong Hyun commanded the Earth destroyer Indomitable as it jumped into a system where a hegemony fleet was gathering to launch another attack on Earth, and his orders were simple, which was to make sure that fleet never reached its destination. The hegemony ships were expecting to face the same primitive vessels that they had always fought against, and they were not prepared for weapons that could destroy their largest dreadnoughts. With single shots, or for tactics that used the laws of physics as weapons, Dong Hyun's ship appeared behind the enemy fleet and fired projectiles that moved at a significant fraction of light speed, and when they struck the alien vessels, the kinetic energy was so great that it turned metal into plasma and crews into vapor. "Enemy fleet is broken," reported his tactical officer. "Remaining ships are attempting to retreat, but our pursuit craft are already moving to intercept." The pattern repeated itself across dozens of star systems as Earth's forces struck at every hegemony fleet that tried to gather for an attack, and soon the aliens realized that they could not mass their forces anywhere without being detected and destroyed. The Galactic hegemony that had ruled the galaxy for 1,000 years was learning that there were some enemies that could not be conquered with traditional warfare, and Earth was teaching them this lesson with weapons that turned their greatest strengths into fatal weaknesses, but Earth was not finished with their education. The Galactic Hegemony Council gathered in their most secure chamber deep beneath the surface of Nexus Prime, and for the first time in their 1,000-year history they were afraid because the reports coming from across their empire painted a picture of destruction that seemed impossible to believe. High Commander Zexthul stood before a holographic display that showed the current state of their military forces, and the numbers made his reptilian blood run cold, because in just 3 months, Earth had destroyed more hegemony infrastructure than any enemy had managed in the previous century of warfare. "Our shipyard capacity is down 70%, he reported to the assembled council. "Our communication network has been reduced to isolated pockets that cannot coordinate with each other, and our fleet strength has been cut in half by these surgical strikes." The Zephyrian Hive Queens spoke in unison with voices that buzzed with anger. How can a single primitive world accomplish what entire star empires have failed to do, and why can we not locate their home base or predict their next attack? Intelligence Officer Mordak shifted his form nervously as he delivered news that would shake the foundation of everything the hegemony believed about warfare and conquest. Our analysis suggests that the humans are not operating from a single location, but have established hidden bases throughout our territory, he said. They appear to have been planning this campaign for decades, and have infiltrated our space far more thoroughly than we initially believed. The crystalline Nexari collective pulsed with colors that indicated deep confusion because their shared consciousness could not comprehend how a species could coordinate such complex operations without a centralized command structure that could be detected and destroyed. On Earth, Admiral So Young stood before a holographic map that showed the entire galaxy, and the red zones that marked areas where hegemony control had been broken by her forces, and she smiled, because the plan that humanity had developed over 50 years of careful observation was working exactly as designed. The hegemony is beginning to fragment, reported Commander Tae-hyun, who had just returned from a deep strike mission against enemy supply lines. Several member species are questioning whether this war is worth the losses they are suffering. So Young nodded because Earth's strategy had never been simply to defeat the hegemony militarily, but to break apart the political alliance that held their empire together and turn their own member species against each other. Initiate Operation Divide, she ordered, and across human space, specialized teams began missions that would exploit the growing cracks in the hegemony alliance. Captain Haya Jin led a small team of specialists as they infiltrated a meridian colony world where the aquatic species was growing increasingly unhappy with their role in the hegemony war effort, and her mission was to make that unhappiness grow into something much more dangerous. The Meridians had joined the hegemony centuries ago because they needed protection from aggressive neighbors, but they had always been reluctant members who preferred trade and exploration to conquest and warfare. Hai Jin's team used advanced technology to appear as members of other hegemony species and began spreading carefully crafted information that suggested the Zephyrian hives were planning to sacrifice Meridian worlds to protect their own colonies from Earth's attacks. The lies were subtle and believable because they were based on real tensions that had existed between the species for generations, and within weeks, Meridian fleets began withdrawing from joint operations to protect their own territory. Similar operations were taking place across hegemony space as Earth agents exploited every weakness and division within the Empire and turned allies into enemies through careful manipulation. And strategic deception Commander Sung Min led the Earth ship Retribution on a mission that would strike at the heart of hegemony power when he jumped into the Nexus system itself and began attacking the orbital defense platforms that protected their capital world. The platforms were the most advanced military installations in the galaxy and were defended by weapons that could destroy entire fleets. But Sung Min had studied their design for years and knew exactly where their weaknesses lay. His ship appeared directly above one of the platforms and fired a single projectile that had been designed specifically to penetrate their shield technology, and when it struck the massive station, simply ceased to exist in a flash of light that could be seen from the planet below. Platform 7 destroyed, reported his weapons officer, moving to next target. The Retribution danced between enemy fire with movements that seemed to violate the laws of physics, and one by one the great defense platforms that had protected Nexus Prime for centuries fell to weapons that their builders had never imagined. On the planet below, alarms screamed across every city as the population realized that their world was under direct attack for the first time in their history, and panic began to spread through the streets as people tried to comprehend how their invincible defenses had been penetrated. Lieutenant Ji-yeon led her fighter squadron through the atmosphere of a Zephyrian breeding world where millions of larvae were developing in vast hive complexes, and her orders were to destroy the facilities that would produce the next generation of hegemony warriors. Her weapons fired continuously as she flew between the towering spires that housed the young Zephyrians, and each shot brought down structures that had taken decades to build and contained genetic material that could never be replaced. Primary breeding complex destroyed, she reported. Secondary targets eliminated, and tertiary sites are burning. The Zephyrian queens who received this news fell into a grief so deep that their entire species felt it through their psychic connection, and they immediately withdrew their fleets from offensive operations to protect Their remaining breeding world's engineer Yu Jin worked in a secret laboratory hidden in an asteroid belt, where she developed weapons that would make even Earth's current technology seem primitive by comparison. Her latest creation was a nanoscale weapon that could be programmed to target specific materials and break them down at the molecular level, and when deployed against enemy ships, it would simply cause their hulls and weapons and engines to fall apart. "Field test successful," she reported. To Admiral So Young, the nanobots completely dismantled a captured hegemony cruiser in less than an hour and left no trace of their presence. So Young smiled because she knew that this weapon would change the nature of warfare itself and make it impossible for any empire to maintain the massive fleets that had traditionally been necessary for galactic conquest. The Hegemony Council met again, but this time their chamber was half empty because several member species had withdrawn from the alliance entirely, and others had reduced their participation to the minimum required by their treaties. "The humans are destroying us from within," declared Nexari Collective Prime. "They are using our own diversity against us and turning our greatest strength into our greatest weakness." High Commander Zexthul looked at the tactical displays that showed hegemony territory shrinking daily as worlds declared independence or simply stopped responding to central authority. "We must negotiate," he said, and the words tasted like poison in his mouth because the hegemony had never negotiated with anyone and had always imposed their will through superior force. But when they sent their message to Earth, offering to discuss terms for ending the conflict, the response they received made it clear that humanity had no interest in negotiation. "This is Admiral So Young of Earth Defense Command," came the reply. "We do not negotiate with empires and we do not accept partial surrender. And any hegemony species that wishes to continue existing will abandon their alliance immediately and withdraw to their home systems." The ultimatum was accompanied by a demonstration of Earth's new nanoscale weapons as an entire hegemony fleet simply stopped functioning and drifted helplessly in space while their crews watched their ships fall apart around them. "You have one standard galactic month to comply." So Young's message continued. "After that time, any world that still claims membership in the hegemony will be considered a military target and will be treated accordingly." The council chamber erupted into chaos as species representatives shouted at each other in dozens of different languages, and the thousand-year-old alliance that had ruled the galaxy began to tear itself apart. Within days, the first defections began as minor species declared their independence, and major powers started withdrawing their forces to protect their own territories, and the great galactic hegemony began its final collapse. But Earth was not finished, because Admiral So Young had one more lesson to teach the galaxy about the price of threatening humanity, and she was going to deliver it personally. Admiral So Young stood on the bridge of Earth's newest warship, the Sovereign, and watched through the view screen as her fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Nexus system, where the heart of the galactic hegemony still beat with desperate defiance. The massive Earth fleet that accompanied her was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen, because each ship incorporated technology that had been stolen from the hegemony and then improved with human innovation until it became something entirely new and far more deadly than its original design. "All ships report ready for combat," announced Commander Junho from his position at the tactical station. "Enemy forces are detected throughout the system, but they appear to be in complete disarray." So Young nodded because she had expected this chaos since the hegemony alliance was falling apart faster than anyone had predicted, and species that had worked together for centuries were now fighting each other for the right to surrender first to Earth. The Zephyrian hives had withdrawn most of their forces to protect their breeding worlds after Earth's devastating attacks on their population centers, and the crystalline Nexari Collective was fragmenting as their shared consciousness broke down under the stress of constant defeats. Only the reptilian Vorth military caste remained fully committed to the war, and their fleets still guarded Nexus Prime with the desperate fury of creatures that knew they were facing extinction. "Begin the approach," ordered So Young, "and transmit our final ultimatum to the planetary government." The message that went out from the Sovereign was broadcast on every frequency and in every language spoken in the galaxy, because Earth wanted every species to hear what would happen to empires that threatened humanity. This is Admiral So Young of the Earth Defense Force. Her voice carried across space with the authority of a species that had never been conquered. The galactic hegemony is hereby dissolved, and all member species are ordered to return to their home systems immediately. The response from Nexus Prime came from High Commander Zexthul himself, and his words carried the rage and desperation of a leader whose empire was crumbling around him. "You may have won some battles, human," he transmitted, "but Nexus Prime has defenses that your primitive minds cannot comprehend, and we will never surrender to a species that crawled out of mud only yesterday." So Young smiled because she had hoped the hegemony would choose to fight rather than surrender, because Earth needed to send a message to the entire galaxy that would be remembered for 1,000 years. "All ships," she announced, "commence orbital bombardment and show them why Earth does not negotiate with empires." The Earth fleet opened fire with weapons that had been designed specifically to penetrate the defenses of Nexus Prime, and the orbital platforms that had protected the hegemony capital for centuries began to explode one by one in brilliant flashes of light. Captain Dong Hyun commanded the destroyer Indomitable as it dove through the defensive fire of enemy weapons that filled space with deadly energy, and his ship's armor shrugged off attacks that would have vaporized lesser vessels. "Target acquired," announced his weapons officer, firing main cannon. The energy beam that lanced out from the Indomitable struck a massive defense station and cut through its shields and hull like they were made of paper, and the explosion that followed lit up half the system. Engineer Yujin watched from her laboratory ship as the nanobotic weapons she had developed were deployed against the hegemony fleet, and she felt a mixture of pride and horror as she saw her creations turn the most advanced warships in the galaxy into drifting hulks. "Nanobots have achieved 70% penetration of enemy fleet," she reported. "Their ships are losing structural integrity, and most are dead in space." The Vorth commanders, who remained loyal to the hegemony, watched in growing terror as their mighty dreadnoughts simply fell apart around them, and their crews abandoned ship in whatever escape pods still functioned. Lieutenant Ji-eun led her fighter squadron through the wreckage of what had once been the most powerful fleet in the galaxy, and her weapons picked off the surviving enemy ships with methodical precision. "Nexus Prime orbital defenses are down," she reported. "The planet is defenseless and ready for final assault." So Young looked at the world that had been the center of galactic civilization for 1,000 years and made a decision that would echo through history for ages to come. "Prepare the planet. Kill her," she ordered, and her crew moved to activate a weapon that Earth had built in secret and hoped never to use. The device that emerged from the Sovereign's cargo bay was small and unremarkable, but it contained technology that could crack a planet like an egg and turn billions of years of geological history into scattered asteroids. "Target locked," reported the weapons officer. "Planet killer is armed and ready." High Commander Zexthul received the sensor readings that showed the Earth weapon being prepared, and for the first time in his life he felt true fear, because he understood that these humans were not bluffing and would actually destroy his world. "You cannot do this," he transmitted in desperation. "There are billions of innocent civilians on this planet who have never harmed Earth." So Young's response was cold and final. "Your empire came to destroy our world and enslave our people, and now you will learn the price of threatening humanity, but we are not monsters, like you. So we give you one last chance to surrender." The silence that followed stretched for long minutes, while the hegemony leadership debated whether to sacrifice their pride or their planet, and finally Zexthul's voice came across the communication channel with words that tasted like poison. "The galactic hegemony surrenders unconditionally," he said. "We accept all Earth demands and request mercy for our civilian population." So Young studied the planet below and considered whether to accept this surrender or complete the destruction that would serve as a permanent warning to anyone who might threaten Earth in the future. "Surrender accepted," she finally announced. "But understand that mercy is not weakness, and Earth will be watching to ensure that your compliance is complete and permanent." The nanobotic weapons were recalled before they could completely destroy the remaining hegemony ships, and the planet killer was powered down but not removed because Earth wanted the galaxy. to know that humanity possessed the power to end worlds. Commander Sung Min received orders to establish orbital monitoring stations around Nexus Prime that would ensure the former hegemony capital could never again become the center of a galactic empire. Installation complete, he reported. All hegemony military facilities have been dismantled, and their governing council has been dissolved under Earth supervision. Lieutenant Min Ho coordinated the massive intelligence operation that cataloged every former hegemony world and assessed their threat potential and loyalty to the new order that Earth was establishing. Preliminary reports indicate that most species are eager to cooperate with Earth demands, he announced. They have seen what happened to those who resisted and prefer survival to pride. Captain Hyojin led teams that established monitoring posts throughout former hegemony space and ensured that no species could begin rebuilding military forces that might threaten Earth or any other world. The work of dismantling a galactic empire was complex and time-consuming, but Earth had prepared for this phase of their campaign as carefully as they had planned. The military operations. Admiral So Young stood in what had once been the Hegemony Council chamber and looked at the empty seats where representatives of 12 species had once planned the conquest of the galaxy. Record this message for transmission to every world in known space, she told her communication officer. Today, the galactic hegemony has ceased to exist, and Earth hereby establishes new laws that will govern relations between all species. The message that went out from Nexus Prime reached every corner of the galaxy and announced the dawn of a new age in which no empire would be permitted to exist and no species would be allowed to conquer others. Earth claims no territory beyond our home system, So Young announced, but we will not tolerate any attempt to rebuild empires or threaten peaceful species, and any world that violates these principles will face the same fate as the hegemony. The galaxy listened in stunned silence as a species that had been unknown just months before declared themselves the guardians of galactic peace and promised to enforce their will with weapons that had proven capable of destroying any opposition. But Earth's work was far from finished, because establishing peace required more than just winning wars, and humanity would have to prove they could build something better than the empire they had destroyed. 1 year after the fall of the galactic hegemony, the galaxy had become a very different place, and Admiral So Young stood in her new office on Orbital Station Terra, which served as Earth's primary command center for monitoring the thousands of worlds that had once belonged to the greatest empire in known space. The massive holographic display that dominated her office showed the current status of every star system within 500 light-years of Earth and the colors that indicated. Each world's political alignment painted a picture that would have been impossible to imagine when the war began. Green lights marked worlds that had accepted Earth's protection and agreed to follow the new galactic laws that prohibited aggressive expansion and the oppression of other species, and these made up nearly 60% of all inhabited systems. Yellow lights showed worlds that remained independent but had signed non-aggression treaties with Earth and promised to respect the sovereignty of their neighbors, and these represented another 30% of galactic civilization. Red lights marked the few remaining systems where former hegemony species still harbored dreams of rebuilding their empire or launching new conquests, and these were under constant surveillance by Earth monitoring station's morning report, announced Commander Jun Ho as he entered the office, carrying a datapad filled with intelligence summaries from across the galaxy. 3 more Zephyrian Hive worlds have requested protection status, and the Meridian Confederation has completed their disarmament verification. So Young nodded with satisfaction because the voluntary disarmament of former hegemony military forces was proceeding faster than Earth had dared to hope, and most species seemed genuinely relieved to be free from the constant warfare that had defined galactic politics for centuries. Captain Hyun Woo had been promoted to Sector Admiral and now commanded Earth's exploration, fleets which sought out species that had been oppressed under hegemony rule and offered them partnership rather than conquest. His latest mission had taken him to the Andorian cluster, where a species of peaceful traders had been forced to serve as slave laborers in hegemony, mining operations, and his ships had liberated dozens of worlds while hunting down the overseers who had brutalized innocent populations. The Andorians have agreed to join the Free Trade Alliance, he reported during his weekly briefing. and they are providing valuable intelligence about other enslaved species in the Outer Rim territories. The Free Trade Alliance was Earth's alternative to the old empire system, and it allowed species to cooperate for mutual benefit, without surrendering their independence to a central authority that might become corrupt or aggressive. Lieutenant Ji-Yun had become Captain Ji-Yun and now led Earth's Rapid Response Forces, which dealt with any attempts to rebuild military threats or restart aggressive expansion. Her latest assignment had taken her to the Kepler system, where a group of former Vorth military officers were attempting to establish a new conquest fleet using hidden weapons caches. Target eliminated, she reported after returning from the mission. The weapons cache has been destroyed, and the conspirators have been transferred to the rehabilitation facility on Luna Station. Earth's approach to defeated enemies was unusual in galactic history because, rather than executing or enslaving them, humanity offered rehabilitation programs that taught former aggressors how to build peaceful societies. The programs were voluntary, but the alternative was exile to isolated worlds where they could harm no one but themselves, and most chose rehabilitation over permanent banishment. Engineer Yu Jin had established a new research facility where she worked on developing technologies that could be shared with peaceful species to improve their quality of life, without providing weapons that might be used for conquest. Her latest breakthrough was a terraforming system that could transform dead worlds into garden planets in just a few decades, and she was already working with 12 different species to establish new colonies. The Centauri project is ahead of schedule, she reported, and the Meridians have requested assistance with terraforming their lost homeworld. The restoration of worlds that had been damaged by hegemony exploitation was one of Earth's highest priorities because it demonstrated that humanity's intentions were genuinely peaceful rather than simply another form of conquest. Captain Sung Min commanded the patrol fleet that enforced Earth's exclusion zones around the home systems of species that still posed potential threats, and his ships maintained a watchful presence that discouraged any attempts at military rebuilding. The Vorth home system remains under quarantine, he reported, but their civilian population is showing increasing interest in our cultural exchange programs. The cultural exchange programs were Earth's long-term strategy for transforming aggressive species into peaceful ones by exposing them to human concepts of cooperation and individual freedom. Commander Dong Hyun led the diplomatic corps that negotiated agreements between former enemy species and helped resolve conflicts before they could escalate into warfare. His greatest success had been mediating the territorial dispute between the Nexari collectives and the Zephyrian hives, which had threatened to restart major hostilities in the galactic core. The boundary agreement has been signed, he announced, and both species have agreed to establish joint colonies as a demonstration of their commitment to peaceful coexistence. Captain Haya Jin had become Earth's primary intelligence officer, and her network of agents monitored every corner of the galaxy for signs of emerging threats or species that might need Earth's assistance. Intelligence indicates that the Outer Rim species are beginning to form their own defensive alliances, she reported, but they appear to be following Earth's model rather than attempting to rebuild empire structures. This was exactly what Earth had hoped to achieve, because the goal had never been to rule the galaxy, but to prevent anyone else from doing so, and the emergence of multiple independent alliances meant that no single power could dominate others. Lieutenant Minho had become Captain Minho, and now commanded Earth's technology sharing program, which provided advanced knowledge to species that had proven their peaceful intentions. The agricultural enhancement package has been delivered to 47 worlds, he reported, and preliminary results show crop yields increasing by 300%. The technology sharing program was carefully controlled to ensure that Earth's gifts could not be weaponized, but the benefits to peaceful species were enormous and created powerful incentives for cooperation. Admiral So Young reviewed all these reports with satisfaction because they showed that Earth's strategy was working better than anyone had dared to hope, and the galaxy was becoming more peaceful and prosperous than it had been in centuries. But her greatest pride came from the monitoring reports that showed former hegemony species learning to live without conquest and developing their own cultures of cooperation and mutual respect. The Meridians had become master shipbuilders who created vessels for exploration rather than war, and their designs were being copied throughout the galaxy. The Nexari collectives had focused their shared consciousness on scientific research and were making breakthroughs in physics and mathematics that benefited every species. Even some of the Zephyrian hives had abandoned their warrior culture and were developing new forms of art and philosophy that celebrated individual achievement within collective harmony. Only the Vorth military caste remained stubbornly committed to their old ways, but even they were beginning to show signs of change as their younger generation questioned the wisdom of endless warfare. Status report on the Vorth rehabilitation program. So young. Requested slow but steady progress, replied Captain Hyjin. The younger officers are responding well to our education programs, and several have requested permission to join Earth exploration missions. So Young smiled, because she knew that change would come eventually even to the most stubborn species, and Earth had proven that it had both the patience and the power to wait for that change to occur naturally. The communication system chimed, and her aide, Captain Seo Jun, announced that representatives from the Free Trade Alliance were requesting a meeting to discuss expanding membership to include species from the Galactic Rim. Tell them I will meet with them tomorrow, she said, and prepare a briefing on Rim world politics as Seo Jun left to make the arrangements. So Young walked to the great window that looked out at the stars and thought about how much had changed since the day when hegemony ships had first appeared in Earth's solar system. The galaxy was still full of challenges, and there would always be species that dreamed of conquest and empire, but Earth had proven that such dreams could be stopped by those willing to fight for freedom. Admiral called Captain Seo Jun from the doorway. There is a priority message from the Rim worlds requesting Earth's assistance with a potential threat. So Young turned from the window with a smile, because she knew that Earth would always be ready to respond to such requests, and that humanity's commitment to galactic peace was permanent and unshakable. Prepare the fleet, she ordered, and remind all commanders that Earth means what it says. The galaxy had learned that lesson well, but there would always be those who needed to be taught it again, and Earth would be there to provide that education for as long as the stars continued to shine.